The day my neighbor's fancy car pulled out of his driveway for the last time. I was standing on my porch with a cup of cheap coffee, watching a moving truck take away everything he owned. 3 years earlier, that same man told me, to my face, that people like me didn't belong on this street. I never said a word back then. I just nodded and walked away. But today? Today I was holding the keys to his house in my hand. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who had more than you, stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a house. It's about what happens when you refuse to give up, even when everyone around you thinks you're a joke. Let me take you back to where this all started. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is where I was 5 years ago. I was 31 years old, a single mom, living in a rented duplex in a small town in Ohio. My daughter Emily was 6. Her dad had left when she was 2, and honestly, I don't even like talking about that part. Let's just say I raised her mostly on my own, working double shifts as a waitress and cleaning houses on the weekends. You know that feeling when you're doing everything right, and it still feels like you're falling behind? That was my life. Every single month. I remember counting coins on my kitchen table just to buy diapers. I remember eating ramen noodles for 4 days straight so Emily could have a real dinner. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I want you to understand exactly where I was starting from. Then one year everything changed, sort of. I inherited a small piece of land from my grandmother. It wasn't much. Just half an acre in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I had something that couldn't be taken away from me. I decided to build a tiny house on it. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for me and Emily. A place we could actually call home. That's when I met him. My neighbor. His name was Richard. Richard Caldwell. He lived in this massive brick house right next to my little lot. The kind of house you see in magazines. Circular driveway. 3-car garage. A fountain in the front yard, if you can believe that. A fountain. In Ohio. Richard was a retired businessman. Made his money in real estate, or so people said. He drove a black Mercedes and wore expensive watches even when he was just walking his dog. The first time I met him, I was standing outside my half-built house, covered in sawdust, trying to figure out how I was going to afford the roof. He walked over. I thought maybe he was coming to introduce himself, welcome me to the neighborhood. You know, normal stuff. Instead, he looked at my little house, still just a wooden frame at that point, and said, "You do know property values around here depend on consistency, right?" I didn't understand what he meant at first. So I just smiled and said, "I'm building it myself. It's going to be small, but it'll be home." He gave this little laugh. Not a mean laugh exactly. Worse. A pitying laugh. "Well," he said, "I hope you can afford to finish it." Then he walked back to his mansion like he'd just said something perfectly normal. I stood there for a long time after he left, just staring at my half-built walls. And I remember thinking, okay, message received. I'm not wanted here. You might be wondering how bad things really got. Well, let me walk you through it. Building that house took me almost 2 years. 2 years of working every single day. I wasn't waitressing, hauling lumber, learning how to do plumbing from YouTube videos at midnight, borrowing tools from anyone who'd lend them to me. And the whole time, Richard was right there next door watching. He never yelled at me or threatened me or anything like that. It was worse than that, honestly. It was the little comments. The way he'd glance at my unfinished siding while getting his mail and shake his head, just slightly, like he was disappointed in the street itself. One time, his wife, a woman named Diane, who I actually kind of liked, invited me over for coffee. I was so happy. I thought finally maybe things are turning around. I walked into their house and I swear, it looked like something out of a home decor magazine. Marble countertops. A chandelier bigger than my entire kitchen back home. I remember feeling so out of place in my work jeans and flannel shirt. Richard came downstairs while we were talking, saw me sitting there, and said to Diane right in front of me, "Don't let her borrow the good china, honey. We might not get it back in one piece." He laughed like it was a joke. Diane laughed too, a little nervously. I laughed as well, because what else was I supposed to do? But inside, I felt like I'd been slapped. I want to pause here for a second, Because I think a lot of you know exactly what that feels like. That moment where someone makes you feel small, and you have to just smile through it. Because if you react, you're too sensitive. If you say something, you're making it a big deal. So you just swallow it. Again and again. That's what I did. For years. Things got harder financially too. The restaurant I worked at cut my hours. My car broke down. The transmission, if you know cars, you know that's not cheap. I had to choose between fixing it and paying for Emily's school supplies that month. I chose Emily. I walked 2 miles to work for almost 3 months until I saved enough for the repair. Meanwhile, every single day, I'd walk past Richard's perfect lawn, his perfect house, his perfect life. And some days, I won't lie to you, I hated him a little. Not because he was rich. I didn't care that he had money. I hated the way he used that money to make me feel like I didn't deserve to exist next to him. There was this one winter, probably the hardest winter of my life, where our furnace broke. I didn't have the money to fix it right away. So Emily and I slept in the living room together, wrapped in every blanket we owned, next to a space heater I'd bought secondhand. Richard's house, meanwhile, had those big glowing windows every night. You could see the warm light spilling out onto the snow. I used to stand at my window sometimes, just looking at that light, feeling like the whole universe had decided some people deserve warmth, and some people don't. I never thought I'd say this, but there were nights I cried myself to sleep, not because I was sad exactly, but because I was just so tired. Tired of trying. Tired of being looked down on. Tired of feeling like no matter how hard I worked, I'd never be enough for people like Richard. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's the only place you can actually start building something real. The turning point in my life didn't come from some big dramatic moment. It came from something small. Something almost embarrassing to admit. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my only day off. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where I used to count coins, filling out a job application for a part-time bookkeeping position. I'd been teaching myself accounting at night, using free courses online, because I knew waitressing wasn't going to get me and Emily anywhere long-term. While I was filling out that application, I looked up and saw Richard's Mercedes speeding out of his driveway. Not his usual calm pace. Fast. Reckless, almost. I didn't think much of it at the time. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Diane wasn't around as much. There were fewer cars in that circular driveway. And one day, I saw a man in a suit walking around their property with a clipboard, taking photos of the house. I found out later, through the neighborhood grapevine, you know how small towns are, that Richard's business had collapsed. Some bad investments. A partner who'd scammed him. The details were messy, but the outcome was clear. The man who once had everything was losing it all. I want to be honest with you here, because this story only means something if I'm honest. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction when I heard that. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to pretend I'm a saint either. After years of feeling small next to him, some small part of me thought, good, now you know what it feels like. But that feeling didn't last long, because a few days later, I saw Diane sitting on her porch steps, alone crying. Really crying. Not the composed, put-together Diane I'd always known. Just a woman, broken, sitting on cold concrete steps in front of a house that no longer felt like home. And something in me shifted right then. I walked over. I didn't even think about it, my feet just moved. I sat down next to her, and I didn't say anything smart or wise. I just sat there with her. After a while, she looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry for everything Richard said to you over the years. I should have said something. I was just afraid of him too, in my own way." That's when I realized something important. Richard wasn't powerful. He was scared. Scared his whole life that if he wasn't on top, he was nothing. That's why he needed to put other people down, people like me, just to feel secure in his own skin. That realization changed something in me. I stopped seeing him as this untouchable, powerful figure. I started seeing him as just a man. A flawed, frightened man who'd built his entire identity on things that could disappear overnight. And mine? Mine had been built on something else. On showing up every single day, even when it was hard. On learning new skills at midnight after Emily fell asleep. On refusing to quit, even when quitting would have been so much easier. I finished that bookkeeping application that same week. I got the job 2 weeks later. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And steady was exactly what I needed. Over the next 2 years, everything slowly started to change. Not overnight. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want anyone watching this thinking transformation happens in one dramatic moment. It doesn't. It happens in 1,000 small moments, stacked one on top of another. That bookkeeping job led to another opportunity, managing finances for a small local business. Then another business asked me to help them too. Before I knew it, I had built a tiny bookkeeping business of my own, working with 5, then 10, then almost 20 small businesses around town. I want to tell you it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, clients who didn't pay on time, nights where I questioned if I was cut out for any of this. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about those cold nights with the space heater. I thought about Emily asking me why our house didn't glow like the neighbors. And that thought pushed me forward more than any motivational quote ever could. Meanwhile, things kept getting worse for Richard. His business never recovered. He and Diane separated. Not because they stopped loving each other, but because the stress of losing everything broke something between them that couldn't be fixed. Diane moved to be near her sister in another state. Richard stayed, alone, in that big house that used to represent everything he was proud of. I saw him sometimes taking out his trash, and honestly he looked so different. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Just deflated. The confidence that used to radiate off him was gone. There was a day, maybe a year after Diane left, when I was checking my mail and Richard walked over. I braced myself, honestly, thinking maybe he was going to say something cruel again out of frustration with his own life. Instead, he just said, "Your house looks good. You finished the porch." That was it. No insult hidden in there. Just an observation. A human one. I said, "Thanks, Richard. Took me long enough." He nodded and said something I'll never forget. "You know, I used to think people who struggled just weren't trying hard enough. I don't think that anymore." I didn't gloat. I didn't bring up the China comment or the consistency comment or any of it. I just said, struggling doesn't mean you're not trying. Sometimes it means you're trying harder than anyone realizes. He didn't say anything back. He just nodded slowly and walked back to his house. About 8 months after that conversation, I found out Richard was selling. He couldn't keep up with the property taxes and the maintenance on a house that size, not with his income gone. The bank was already circling. He needed to sell fast, and honestly, the market in our area had cooled off. Nobody local wanted a house that big anymore. Too much upkeep. Too expensive to heat in the winter. Trust me, I remembered those glowing windows. My business, by that point, was doing better than I ever imagined it could. Ide savakarafuli. Ide imbasta. I'd learned, through watching Richard's collapse up close, exactly what not to do with money. Never overextend. Never build your identity on things that can be taken from you. Always keep something solid underneath you. When I heard the house was going up for sale, something in me just knew. I called the realtor before the listing even went public. I want to tell you it was some grand, triumphant decision, but honestly, it was practical. The house needed work, sure, but the land, the location, the bones of it, it was a good investment. And Emily was almost 13 by then. She deserved more space. She deserved a proper room to grow up in. I made an offer. A fair one, not a lowball, because I didn't want this to be about revenge. It was never about revenge for me, not really. It was about building something solid for my daughter, something that couldn't be taken away. Richard accepted the offer within a week. The day of the final walkthrough, before closing, he was there to hand over some paperwork. We stood in that huge kitchen, the one with the marble counters I remembered from that awkward coffee visit years earlier. And neither of us said much at first. Finally, he said, "I never thought this would be how things turned out." I said, "Neither did I, Richard. Honestly, neither did I." He looked around the kitchen one more time, and then he said something that surprised me. He said, "Take care of it. It was a good house. I just forgot how to be a good person while I was living in it." I didn't say anything clever back. I just nodded and said, "I'll take care of it." And I have. Now, if you're watching this thinking this story is about revenge, about winning against someone who wronged me, I want to gently correct that. Because that's not really what this is about. This is about what happens when you refuse to let someone else's opinion of you become your reality. Richard looked at me, at my half-built house, at my worn-out jeans, and decided I didn't belong. But he was wrong. Not because I ended up buying his house. That part is almost beside the point. He was wrong because worth was never something he had the power to give or take away from me in the first place. I think about that a lot now, actually living in this house with Emily. Sometimes I stand in that kitchen with the marble counters. And I remember standing there years ago, feeling so small, so out of place. And now it's just home. My home. Built on years of double shifts, midnight YouTube tutorials, cold nights with a space heater, and refusing, over and over again, to quit. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. The way someone treats you when you have nothing does not determine your worth. It only reveals who they are. I know some of you watching this are in your own version of that half-built house right now. Maybe you're counting coins on your own kitchen table. Maybe someone in your life has made you feel small, made you feel like you don't belong where you are. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're one bad month away from breaking. I want you to know, you are not behind. You are building. And nobody gets to see the finished version of your life yet. Not even you. Richard didn't lose his house because I wished bad things on him. He lost it because he built his whole identity on something that could be taken away. I gained mine because I built my life on something that couldn't. Hard work, patience, and refusing to give up on myself. Even when nobody else believed in me. So if this story meant something to you today, if any part of it reminded you of your own struggle, your own quiet fight that nobody else sees, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life where someone made you feel small, and how did you prove them wrong? I read every single comment, and I promise you, your story matters just as much as mine. And if you want to hear more real stories like this one, hit subscribe, because there are so many more journeys just like mine that deserve to be told. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Take care of yourself. And remember, keep building. Even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. I'll see you in the next video.